Hi, and welcome to the New Moon Knitting Podcast. I'm Hillary, and today we're talking all about charity knitting. So today's episode was inspired by some comments I recently received. In my last couple of regular podcasts, you may have heard me talk about an Oslo hat that I've been knitting, and that I'm knitting this hat specifically for charity. And I've mentioned that every year I like to try to do some charity knitting along with other knits that I do. And last year I got super distracted and I didn't get started until end of September, early October on those charity knits. And so the whole process felt kind of rushed and I didn't really get done what I wanted to get done. And so this year I'm making a really concerted effort to start early and keep it going throughout the year. So I have a goal to knit at least one item for charity every month so that by the time we get to December, I should have at least 12 items that I can donate to charity. And when I mentioned this and sort of my process, I got a couple of comments about charity knitting. What do you knit besides hats for charity? And what are some charities that you like to use? And some other sort of similar questions in that vein. So in today's video, I want to walk through the ins and outs of charity knitting, some suggestions on what to knit, charities to knit for, what kind of yarns to use. I'll also have a couple of free patterns that I've knit before that I think are good for charity knitting. And at the end, I'll have a list of a couple of charities you might consider knitting for. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to try to do this as a knit and chat, and I thought if I'm doing a knit and chat, I have to be doing like a charity item, I think, for this one. And so just this morning, just for this video, I cast on another Oslo hat by Petite Knit. So this is a classic stockinette hat. It was available in 4 sizes, and when I knit my previous one, I was using the older version of the pattern. But like 2 days after I cast it on, Petite Knit actually released a new update to the pattern, and it now comes in 7 sizes ranging from like baby through to adult male. And so I thought I should try the new pattern. And so I am knitting the 2nd size, which is meant for like a child. And I'm using, I actually don't know if these are the recommended needles. The pattern calls for a US 3 or a 3mm needle. And I think another podcaster, Study Knits, has talked about this issue before with some like Scandinavian patterns where a US 3 is a 3.25mm needle. A US 2.5 is a 3mm needle. I don't have a 2.5, so I'm using a US 3, and I'll check the gauge probably when I'm done. I think with a hat, you have some flexibility for like the type of heads that it will fit. If it's a little smaller, it could be more of like a baby hat. If it's a little bit bigger, it could be for like a teen. So yeah, I literally just cast it on. I did like 2 rows, and the yarn I'm using is Lion Brand Respun, which is a 100% recycled polyester yarn. It's what I knit basically all my charity knits out. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So I guess before we jump into stuff, I do want to like acknowledge, like, I'm not an expert in this field. I don't have any background in nonprofits or NGOs. I'm just somebody that's been knitting for charity for about 4 years now. I started in 2020. So I'm really just speaking from my own experience. But if you have additional information, if you know anything that I didn't share, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. And yeah, help us all out to learn a little bit more about this process. So why knit for charity? Now, I don't know if that's something that I can answer for other people because I think it's such a personal thing, but a couple reasons that I like to knit for charity. One, I think you can make a tangible difference in a person's life. I know how special my hand knits are to me and how I have items my mom's made me that are so special. And I've seen how much the people in my lives really appreciate hand knit items. And so I think being able to share my hobby with more people and hopefully give folks something nice and warm who are struggling in some way feels really nice. I think you can make an impact on your community. So particularly if you focus on local charities or charities that impact like a community you're part of, you can feel like you made a difference in that community. I'll be honest, I get a lot of personal satisfaction out of it. It feels good to give to other people. I think sometimes I've talked about my anxiety before, and sometimes, I just think there are a lot of problems in the world that I have very little control over. And when I can do something that makes me feel like I'm doing good, it can help me alleviate some of that stress and anxiety. And so I think for me, knitting a hat for somebody who needs it can feel like a little way to help when things feel helpless. And another reason is it's a great way to use your stash. So a lot of us have really wonderful yarns in our stash that are colors we don't like to wear, or, maybe you have a hat quantity of yarn, but you personally have more hats than you know what to do with. Everyone you love has more hats than they know what to do with. And so it gives you an opportunity to use some of those yarns and create something really lovely and special, and then give it away to someone who's really going to appreciate it. All right, how to find a charity. So my recommendation is usually start locally. I think you'll have a lot more of an impact if you do something that's closer to home. And I also think, if it's a national or a worldwide organization, they just have a much larger pool of people to pull from. And so they have other options if you're unable to, where a small local charity could really probably use your skills a lot more and do a lot more direct impact in the community that you live in. The other thing I would recommend is find a cause you care about. So try to find something that really motivates you and gets you excited to make a difference. In terms of finding a charity that's, well reviewed and isn't scammy or stuff, there's a couple of websites out there that you can use to do your own research and learn more about the company. One of them is called Charity Navigator. I'll link these below, but I'll say the names of them. One's Charity Navigator, another one is called Charity Watch, and one is called give.org. There's other ones, but those are kind of three big ones. The only thing I'll say is I looked up some of the charities I recommend at the end of this, and they're bigger knitting charities. They're US based, but I'd certainly heard of them before I put this together, and they didn't have any information. They had listings, but they didn't have reviews or anything. So if you're looking at a smaller charity, it might be difficult to get the information that you'd like before you give from one of these websites, but it is a good place to start. If you live in the US, you also can use the IRS's website to check an organization's eligibility to receive tax-deductible charitable contributions. So I'll link to that search below. You do need, I think it's the EIN number, but I found some of those numbers on Charity Navigator, and you may also be able to find them on a website for the charity and things like that. If they are a reputable charity, they'll be more than happy to share that information with you so that you can just confirm with the IRS that they are cleared to accept tax-deductible charitable donations, and everything's kind of on the up and up. The next thing you're going to want to do, right, once you've got a charity in mind, is choose the right yarns. So this obviously varies from charity to charity. The first thing you should do before you pick a yarn at all is check the charity's yarn recommendations or requirements. Some charities have requirements on the kind of material you can use. Some have requirements on the weight of the yarn, so they need to be above a certain weight. And so just always check that first before listening to anything else that I say about yarn. Once you've confirmed the charity's yarn requirements, the next thing you're going to want to do is I would say try to pick a yarn that is machine washable and dryable, as long as it like fits in the charity recommendations. So the reason for this is a lot of times if you're donating to charity, these are people in a situation where they may not have the time or the resources or like the energy to hand wash and dry items that are given to them. And so they need to be able to hold up to a laundry wash and dry. And you should kind of anticipate that it's, it's not going to be like a gentle tumble dry low. It might be kind of like a standard dryer. So this can make wool a difficult fiber to work with. I know superwash wool can technically be tumble dried, but I've also found it can be like a little persnickety depending on what superwash yarn you're using. So if you really want to use wool, or actually like if you're going to use any yarn, I might recommend making like a swatch and throwing that through the washer dryer the next time you wash a load of clothes. Just put it in the way you would a clothes cycle and just confirm that everything comes out the way you expect it to. And then that should be good to go for any charity knitting you want to do. I tend to use synthetic yarns for a lot of charity knitting for a couple of reasons. One, like I said, it tends to hold up better to like machine wash and dry. Often I'm knitting for like children, and children just get things messy and they're not always that delicate with their clothes. And so a hard wearing synthetic sometimes feels like the best option. Also, candidly, like 2 years ago, I bought a bunch of synthetic yarn from Michael's, a craft store here in the United States and maybe other places. And I don't know, I thought I was going to just be like gung-ho and knitting like 100 things for charity a year, but I've made a dent in it, but I'm still trying to get through that. And so also as part of like my stash down journey, I'm trying to focus on charity knits and using that stash, and like charity knits and knits for my nephews are really like the best things to make with that yarn. So I showed it at the beginning, but pretty much anytime you see me talk about a charity knit, I'm always using this Lion brand respun. And honestly, I like working with it in terms of a synthetic yarn. I think maybe because it's polyester, to me, it doesn't feel quite as scratchy as like some acrylics do. It's technically recycled polyester, which I think is kind of nice. But I don't know how much greenwashing that really is, so I don't want to like dwell on that. The only thing I will say is like sometimes the color range is a little muted because it is made from recycled materials. So this color is called Sunshine, and this is really like the brightest one I have. But yeah, it's more like muted blues and creams and greens and things like that. So maybe if that's something to consider when you're choosing a yarn to use. So what should you make for charity? Now, again, this kind of depends on what charity you've chosen. A lot of times charities will list out their most needed items, and so you can focus on those things. Some charities have very specific requirements for what you need to knit, so they have patterns that you need to use and things like that. And so if that's the case, just make sure you use those patterns and everything so that they can use your donations. And if you have kind of like multiple options to start from, I like to knit hats. Hats are my favorite thing to knit for charity, just because I think they're a nice sized project, so you can get quite a few of them done in a year. There are so many different hat patterns out there that like you could knit 12 different hats, no problem, and have something new and exciting to work on every month if you wanted to do what I do and try to knit one thing a month. I also think gloves, not maybe gloves, but mittens are a really nice thing too. Anything that's gonna keep folks warm when it's cold outside, and I think hats and mittens are a great place. Scarves, if you like knitting scarves are awesome. And yeah, so that's what I like to do. But again, check with your chosen charity and see what they are asking for. And then start there and then knit something that excites you and gets you really ready to go with the charity knitting. So, my favorite free patterns for charity, I have 4 that I tend to knit that are free. I will say I really liked knitting that Oslo hat, and it's not a free pattern, but I have really wanted to try that pattern for a long time. I get why it's very popular now, and I do think it's a good charity knit because it's got a triple folded brim because you fold it and then you fold it up, which is going to be super warm around people's ears. But the rest of the hat is a DK weight, so you're not getting too much bulk above, like on the main part of the crown, but still heavy enough to keep you warm. I also think, too, it's just like a very versatile, almost, I don't want to say generic, but like it's a classic basic. And so a lot of people are going to like that kind of hat. It's going to suit a lot of folks. So that's one nice thing about it, but it's not free. So I'm not including it technically on my hats that I tend to knit for charity free list. All right, so I have just 4 patterns that I've knit before for charity that are all free patterns that are great to try. I had to put down my knitting because I need to read my notes, and it's too many things going on if I try to do all of them. So the mitten pattern I love to use is the World's Simplest Mittens by Tin Can Knits. This is a classic mitten pattern, and they're knit cuff up. The pattern is available for basically any gauge of yarn. They have instructions in the pattern for like fingering up through, I think, chunky or bulky weight yarn. The pattern also comes in, I believe, 5 sizes: toddler, child, adult, small, medium, and large. So you got a lot of sizing options in there. And yeah, I just love that, like, whatever yarn you have on hand, you can make a pair of mittens with this pattern. And it's going to always look great because they're simple, they're basic, but like also this is a great scrappy project. You could add stripes, you could do color blocking. Like, I think they just work for anyone. And so, yeah, I would definitely recommend World's Simplest Mittens by Tin Can Knits. So one of my favorite hat patterns is the Ellis hat by Knox Mountain Yarn Company. This is a bottom-up hat, and it comes in both like a beanie and a slouchy version in the free pattern. The pattern calls for a DK weight yarn. They recommend Madeline Tosh DK and Diamond Luxury Tradition. And the gauge is 20 stitches over 4 inches, and it's knit on a US 4, which is a 3.5 millimeter, and a US 6, which is a 4 millimeter needle. I think this is just, again, like a really classic staple piece. I think when I knit it, I do tend to knit the brim a bit longer. So the brim is not folded in this, but I tend to double knit it longer so I can double it up. And I don't know the exact measurements I have for that, but I will figure it out hopefully at some point, and then I can share it. But I like that it has like a beanie and a slouch version. I tend to knit the beanie one just because, I don't know, just tend to knit it. But I like that it comes in a bunch of sizes. I think, like I said, I think DK is a good weight for charity knitting. So yeah, that is the Ellis hat by Knox Mountain Knit Company. Another hat that's great to knit for charity is the 2x2 by Anne Gagnon. This is a free all over 2x2 ribbed hat that's knit bottom up. I really like this hat. I've knit it a couple of times now, and I think I really like the way that the detailing works when you get to the crown shaping and how they incorporate the ribs. It does only come in one size, but I think because it is that all over ribbing, it fits a lot more heads. Like, I think when you get 2x2 rib, you have a lot more stretch, a lot more options. And I could see playing around a little bit with sizing down on your yarn and your needles, and maybe getting a hat for a smaller person. The hat is knit for worsted weight yarn. The gauge is 22 stitches over 4 inches and 2x2 ribbing. It's knit on a US 6, which is a 4 millimeter needle. And some of the recommended yarns are Cascade 220, Malabrigo yarn worsted, and Barocco Ultra Alpaca. So yeah, that's the 2x2 by Anne Gagnon. So The last one, I realized these were all really nice and basic, but I wanted to recommend something that was like a little more fun, a little more special. And so I found a free hat pattern that's all over color work, and I knit it this week so that I could show it off and have it ready to go for charity. So this is the Shine On hat by Martin Up North. It is an all over stranded colorwork hat with this little decrease detailing. So it comes up into like a little bit more of a point because you're working across those diamonds. This hat is available in adult and child sizes, but this is a pattern where in order to change the size, you just change the needle size. So that's something just to keep in mind if you were to knit this. If you know that your stranded color work looks different on like a US 6 versus a US 4, you may just want to consider what size you want to knit this for before you go ahead and commit to it. I knit the smallest size, which is knit on a US 4 or 3.5 millimeter for the brim, and then a US 6 or 4 millimeter for the body of the hat. And so, so this is, it has this folded over brim at the bottom here. And then, it has this all over really lovely little color work areas. And, I just think it looks really nice. So again, I don't know that much about children's heads, but I think this probably would fit like a young child. It's not super big, but this is what the smallest size got me based on the needle recommendation and the gauge. So if you're looking for something that's like a little more fun, a little more interesting, this did only take me like 3 days to knit up, but it was kind of the only thing I was working on. So this is the Shine On hat by Martin Up North. All right, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was a couple of charities that I think you could knit for if you're looking for some inspiration to get started. Now, these are all US-based national charities, so I'm very apologetic for anybody who's turning in from the rest of the world, but this is where I wanted to just like focus my time for today because I know where to look for to verify that they are in good standing as charities more than I would know about other countries' tax laws and things like that. So tried to include a little bit of variety, so maybe something speaks to you. The first one I wanted to mention, and all of these will be linked down below, so but I'll put their names on the screen as well. So the first one is called Wool Aid, and they provide wool items to children in need around the world. So right now on their website, they have campaigns running for children in Ukraine, in Lebanon and Syria, in Afghanistan, and even in the United States. They accept hats, scarves, mittens, blanket squares, sweaters, and vests. The only requirement is that the yarn, must be 80% wool or more, and it has to be worsted weight or above. So that's really interesting because, like I said, a lot of charities, they have a machine washable, dryable recommendation, and that can be hard to get in wool, but this is one that requires you to knit with a wool or a wool blend as long as it's 80% wool. And so that gives you an opportunity to maybe use more of your yarn and some of those things you really love in your stash to make something special for a child in need. The next one is Warm Up America. Warm Up America accepts afghans and blankets that are crocheted or knit. They have current campaigns on their website to aid victims of the recent hurricanes in the United States, aiding children in foster care and other places where they might have housing insecurity, and making items for those people who are in hospice care. So quite a couple of different things you can knit blankets for. The yarns must be machine washable and dryable. And if you want to knit a full blanket, you are welcome to do that. And you can do that kind of in any size that you like. But you also can knit blanket squares that then they stitch together and send off to folks. And if you want to knit squares, they have very specific recipes and patterns for what you can do to knit those squares up. Up next is Knitted Knockers. So this is a charity that accepts knit and crochet prosthetics for breast cancer survivors. They provide a list of approved patterns for the knockers and also a very detailed list of approved yarns. So definitely make sure you check that list before you knit anything for knitted knockers. They also I think they want you to send them flat and unseamed so that they can fill them and stitch them up. And so, yeah, just make sure you read that. But I think this is a great one. I think you could make quite a few of these. Because they're a smaller project, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's Knitted Knockers. So the next one is a little more local to a specific area of the United States, but they accept donations from around the country, and they have plans to expand to other high risk communities. But for right now, they're only in New York, and it's called Knit the Rainbow. It is a charity that provides handmade garments and accessories to homeless LGBTQ plus youth in New York City. They have a bunch of free patterns on their website, all different kinds of styles and things like that in both knit and crochet. So you can use those free patterns, but I also think you can just knit something and send it to them. You don't have to use one of their patterns. They're just there as kind of an additional incentive because they have some really interesting patterns on there. I couldn't find any yarn requirements, but I would assume they're looking for things that are machine washable, dryable. And so I would definitely consider that before you knit anything for Knit the Rainbow. And the last one I want to mention, maybe you don't have the time to knit an item for charity. Maybe you don't have the right yarn on hand and you don't want to buy more yarn. Maybe you're just working on some stuff for yourself right now and you want to get it done, or you're working on a gift knit or something like that. Well, one charity you might consider is Knit for Food. So Knit for Food is a 12-hour knit-a-thon that's held once a year to raise funds for food insecurity. So you can knit whatever you want, but the only thing you have to do is reach out to people to kind of sponsor you doing this 12-hour knit-a-thon. So that you can get donations for your work. They tend to have, I did it 2 years ago. I wanted to do it last year, but I was at a wedding the day of the knit-a-thon, and that felt kind of rude to the bride and groom to be knitting the whole time. So, but the year I did it, they do have incentives. They have a big Zoom chat that they do, and I think if you raise above a certain threshold, you get invited to be a part of that Zoom meeting. And they have a bunch of yarn celebrities on it, big name podcasters and stuff like that. So at least that's what happened when I did it 2 years ago. I don't know if that's like that all the time, but they had a lot of special guests that came in to talk to you about basically hand health and joint health and making sure that your body is in good shape after knitting for so many hours. And so, yeah, I think that's a really good one if you want to do something, make your knitting feel like you're knitting for a good cause, but maybe you don't have the time or the resources to actually knit an item for charity. That is all I have for today. I'll show you. I did not make that much of progress. I probably did 6 or 7 rows on my hat, but I do like this color. I think it looks very pretty. Yellow is not a color I work with all that often, but I do think for a kid's hat, it'll be really cute. I'll probably maybe try to put a pom-pom on this, but I'll see how that works with the Oslo hat. If you have other charities, please go ahead and share them below. I might try to put together some kind of a Google Doc or some kind of thing that I can share in my next regular podcast if people are looking for ideas for places to donate to. So yeah, I would really appreciate anybody's help if you have good resources, if you have good charities, if there's things that you think are good for me to know about, please go ahead and share them below. Also, yeah, I'd love to hear about what your experience with charity knitting has been like. Have you done it before? You want to do it this year? Any sort of interesting things or stories about your experience? I always love hearing from all of you. So thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of what I'm doing, please go ahead and subscribe. That's all I got for today. I will see you in the next one.